Welcome to Gold and Blue, everybody, home of the college football fan. And don't forget about the checklist. Hat check, sunglasses check, Pepsi check, notes check, sources check, and thick skin is a check. And don't forget to send gear to represent your team and yourself in my background. Send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657, and get yourself a shout out. On to the next video. Yes, this will be a Get It Gang video. If you're not familiar with Get It Gang, it's basically the name that I came up with for the group of people that come up with video ideas and leave them in the comment section of my videos. So if you think you have a good video idea, leave it in the comment section and I just might use it. On today's Get It Gang video idea, I'm actually going to combine two ideas into one. And even I have to admit, this one might get a little bit crazy, but it's very interesting to think about. The first one is from David Ton. Very short and to the point. How about a Gulf Coast strategy for the Big Ten? Talking about Texas A&M, Tulane, and Florida State. Very interesting. But I'm going to combine that with another Get It Gang video idea. The other one is from Mountaineer News 2. It's a little bit of a long one, so bear with me. Notre Dame, in my opinion, is going to end up joining a conference. And in my opinion, they could be set up by the Big Ten. So to find out all the ACC secrets, the Big Ten must have set up Notre Dame to negotiate with them and to find out the ACC secrets. And we'll find a way to break the grant of rights. And I know the Big Ten is going to pay Notre Dame to do so because Notre Dame is technically a part of Big Ten hockey. So if we're being realistic, I like that phrase right there. If we're being realistic, they do have a relationship with the Big Ten so that Notre Dame can be set up by the Big Ten to kill the ACC while they're acting like they're friends. So, yep, a lot to unpack right there. Very, very interesting. So I'm going to combine those two ideas. First, I want to talk about Notre Dame and maybe being a spy for the Big Ten in order to find out. Let's see all the secrets of the ACC. Let's find out how we can break the grant of rights. And that way that will open up the ACC and the Big Ten can pick up some teams. That's possible. It is possible. Likely? No. Not likely. But it is possible. Anything's possible if you think about it. So the Big Ten and Notre Dame work out an agreement to where, okay, you join the ACC, but find out how to break up the ACC. And when you do so, somehow get the ACC to give you a nuke vote as well. And then you can be a part of the ACC's collapse. And that would actually be a bonus on top of what we're already paying you. I'm telling you, you never know, guys. You never know. I mean, because that grant of rights for the ACC seem to be pretty tight. There are a couple ways to get around it. But maybe Notre Dame was sent into the ACC by the Big Ten to figure out how many loopholes are available and which ones are the most doable. Of course, you had the $500 million buyout, but nobody's going to do that. But it is a way to get out of the ACC grant of rights. On top of that, there's also the majority vote. And giving Notre Dame a nuke vote, I call it a nuke vote. Basically, it's a vote to help the majority to vote to dissolve the grant of rights. That doesn't make sense by the ACC. I don't understand why they did that. So this goes along with the plan that David Tone is mentioning, a Gulf Coast strategy. Now, he mentions two teams that aren't in the ACC, Texas A&M and Tulane. And remember the tweet that I read yesterday from MacGyver. And no, he is not a very reliable source, and I'm not counting him as a source, and I'm not saying this is actually happening. I'm just saying it kind of goes along with this Get It Gang video idea. I can confirm Tulane reached out to the Big 12, not the Pac-12, to gauge interest and inform the Big 12 that the Pac-12 is interested. Big 12 is cool on Tulane. Wouldn't be a bad addition, but there are better ones ahead of them. What about Tulane to the Big 10? So what if the Pac-12 is interested in Tulane, but Tulane does not want to join the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 doesn't have a TV deal, and it looks like the Pac-12 could be on the verge of collapse, so they're gauging the interest of the Big 12 and perhaps the Big 10, and they could become part of the Gulf Coast strategy for the Big 10. The Big 10 stretching all the way down to the Gulf Coast, but not just grabbing one brand, grabbing multiple brands. Texas A&M is not happy that Texas is coming into the SEC. That is the main reason why the SEC withheld that information as far as telling everybody, hey, Texas and Oklahoma are joining, until it was basically time to vote. They knew Texas A&M was not going to be happy about that, and they were scared that Texas A&M was going to make a big deal out of it. And it is entirely possible that Texas A&M could leave the SEC for the Big Ten, thus being a part of the Big Ten strategy to grab the Gulf Coast. And Texas A&M is definitely a big grab for the Big Ten. Tulane, I'm not so sure, other than just getting more teams on the Gulf Coast. Tulane does have great academics. They did just win the AAC, and they did just beat USC, so their football brand is getting better, but it's not worth that much. But as an academic institution, AAU status, that's a check mark for the Big Ten. I'm just saying. I'm not saying the Big Ten would actually bring in Tulane, but they do have AAU status, and their football brand is halfway decent. Then we turn back to the ACC. The Big Ten and Notre Dame working together to try to figure out the loophole for the ACC to get those grant of rights broken. Once those grant of rights are broken, the Big Ten rewards Notre Dame and says, hey, we're going to give you an unequal revenue share. Not only will we bring you into the Big Ten, but you'll actually make more money than anybody else. Not by a vast majority, but enough to convince Notre Dame to actually join the Big Ten. So after the ACC collapse, going by the Gulf Coast strategy, this is not a prediction, by the way. I am not calling for this to happen. I am not predicting this to happen. In fact, I don't think this will happen. I don't think it will happen. The likelihood of this happening is not very high at all. In fact, it's almost non-existent. But if all this does happen and the ACC does collapse, here's the shakeup we could see out of this. For the Big Ten, they get Notre Dame, North Carolina, Duke, Florida State, Tulane, and Texas A&M out of the SEC. So they're grabbing 6 teams. And really the only brand that doesn't make sense out of this particular grouping is Tulane. But I'm following the Gulf Coast strategy set by David Tahn, so I'm putting Tulane in there. In this scenario, the SEC grabs Clemson, Virginia, NC State, the Miami Hurricanes, and either West Virginia, Virginia Tech, or Oklahoma State to replace the spot left open by Texas A&M. So if the Big Ten grabs Texas A&M, that might provide an extra opportunity for another team. So the 4 teams that the SEC would want in the beginning as far as the ACC collapse would be Clemson, Virginia, NC State, and the Miami Hurricanes. Those are the 4 teams. But then there's one spot open because Texas A&M left for the Big Ten. And that's when they could look over to either a West Virginia or an Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, you're locking in Bedlam. That becomes a conference game. And remember, Oklahoma State has rich boosters. Oklahoma State does have money. Now, for West Virginia, you're grabbing a new footprint for the SEC, and you're going just a little farther north. And West Virginia would be connected solidly to the rest of the SEC because, remember, the SEC already has Kentucky, and they're adding Virginia. So West Virginia is actually a stretch a little bit more north for the SEC, and it's a new footprint. West Virginia has a decent football brand. I don't think West Virginia adds as much value to the SEC compared to if they would go to the ACC, but they do add some revenue. They do add some value. Remember, in the first go-around, it came down to Texas A&M and either Missouri or West Virginia. So West Virginia was already up for SEC discussion. ESPN told the SEC, go with Missouri. That's who they went with. But this go-around, especially if they lose Texas A&M, the SEC could look at a West Virginia, but they could also look at a Virginia Tech and lock in that Virginia-Virginia Tech rivalry. Or they could look at Oklahoma State, who I just mentioned, and lock in Bedlam. Texas A&M leaving the SEC for the Big Ten would just open up an extra opportunity for perhaps some teams that wouldn't have that opportunity. And that's why I would have the SEC looking at those 3 teams. So do I think this will ever happen? Absolutely not. I don't think there's a chance of this happening at all. Maybe if some crazy things happen, I don't know, but I just don't see it happening. However, I do think it's something interesting to think about. And if the Big Ten went this direction, they would solidify themselves as a coast-to-coast conference and a top-to-bottom conference as well. So you'd have Rutgers all the way to USC, and then you'd have Minnesota all the way down to Florida State, Tulane, and Texas A&M. So they would definitely be an all-national conference, not just coast-to-coast, but also north to south. Just something to think about. If the ACC collapses and the Big Ten grabs Florida State, then they would still technically be a coast-to-coast and a north-to-south conference. So y'all let me know in the comment section. Number 1, what do you think about this Gulf Coast strategy by the Big Ten? Do you think it's doable? Do you think it would work? Do you think it would be successful for the Big Ten? The second thing is, do you think it's possible at all that Notre Dame and the Big Ten could be working together to bring down the ACC? And finally, the last thing, if that does happen, if the Big Ten and Notre Dame are working together and they do bring down the ACC, could it turn out to be this particular scenario? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.